Hello out there in Radio Land. This is Michael. This is the Street Preacher's Corner podcast. The podcast where Pluto is still a planet. Not budging on this one, folks. These things matter. Well, here we are in Mark lesson, I think it's 19. We did a couple on the Sabbath and on the subject of the Sabbath. Actually, they were recorded. Not only were they about the Sabbath, they were recorded on the Sabbath. But anyway, so here we are in Mark lesson 19. And every time I record one of these, I am as surprised as anyone else that we're still doing this. But here we are, Mark lesson 19, beginning Mark chapter 3, the very beginning there. The Bible says, "And he entered again in the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand, and they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him." So this is immediately after they got on him about eating corn on the Sabbath. So now he goes to the synagogue, and while he's there at the synagogue, so I guess they eat the corn on the way to the synagogue. They eat some corn, and then once they're there, he sees a man with a withered hand, and it says, and they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. So they watched him for the sole purpose of accusing him. And so there's a lot of interesting going on there. And he said to the man which had the withered hand, "Stand forth, and saith unto them, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill?" But they held their peace. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics here. Excuse me. My goodness. The motive behind, there's a lot of interesting dynamics in this scene, in this scenario. And one of the interesting things about me is the motive behind Jesus' critics. They're literally there. They're literally watching him, not so they can see the miracle. They're literally watching him to see if they can accuse him. And it's interesting to me, they would rather have the man that has a withered hand, they'd rather him go through the rest of his life with a withered hand than for Jesus to heal him on the Sabbath. And it's also interesting that Jesus could have done this quietly, and he could have done this in a corner, but instead he drew attention to what he's about to do. You see that in verse 3. He says to the man with the withered, he said to the man that had the withered hand, "Stand forth." And so, and then verse 4 says, he said unto them, once again, they had thought this, they hadn't said it out loud. He said unto them, once again, Jesus addresses people according to their thoughts. Although I guess it looks like, if you look at Matthew 12. Before I say too much about what those guys did and didn't say, you have to acknowledge the fact that some of them did speak up. It says verse 9, "And when he was departed thence, he went into their synagogue." And I guess this was not a synagogue local to where he lived, but one just up the road or another town. "And behold, there was a man which had his hand withered, and they asked him," so this is them, they, which is, I guess, the crowd there. "They asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days?" So they ask him that before he even does anything. So they knew Jesus was going to the synagogue, or they recognized him when he showed up, and they knew there was a guy that regularly attended the synagogue that had a withered hand. And so they know just by Jesus' habit that when Jesus sees this fella, he's going to heal him. And so before the healing even takes place, it looks like, because the healing doesn't take place in another 3 verses. Even before Jesus has done anything, they're trying to set him up so they can accuse him. So that's their motive. That's that's the reason they're there. They're not there to worship God. They're not there to honor God on the Sabbath at the synagogue. They're not there to hoping that someone in their community that has legitimate issues gets help. They are there for one reason and one reason alone. They are there to criticize and accuse the Son of God, who's about to do right, who's about to do good, who's about to show kindness and healing to someone who has walked through life for God knows how long with a withered hand. And so Jesus turned into these guys, like which he does in Mark 3. He says, "Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill?" Well, it looks like we know from the our other study in the back end of chapter 2. It It looks like that you are allowed to do on the Sabbath days. You're allowed to do things you can't be taken care of the day before. For example, there was a law that said that you could not cook on the Sabbath because it is possible for you to cook twice as much food the day before. It is not lawful for you to kindle a fire on the Sabbath because it was entirely possible. You knew the Sabbath was coming. It did not take you by surprise. It's the same day every week. And so you're expected to make preparations. You're expected to gather the firewood and kindle the fire and keep it burning so that you don't have to kindle it again. You're expected to make enough food. When you're out in the desert or when you're out in the wilderness in the book of Numbers, in the book of Exodus, you're supposed to gather twice as much manna on the Sabbath, so you don't have to get. But Jesus uses as an example in the back end of chapter 2, he uses the example of the priests who do all their work or the majority of their work on the Sabbath. Why? Because it's not like you can prepare for the church service the day before. I mean, you could prepare that, but you have to perform the church service on the day that you're performing the church service. That's not something you can do. You can pre-do, and it's not something you can put off till the next day. The other example Jesus gives in Matthew is he gives examples of, your donkey falls into a ditch, or this happens, that happens, and you have to deal with it right then, right now. Apparently it's not against the law of the Sabbath to do things that can't be done any other time, right? And so this man coming here with his withered hand, God only knows when he's going to see him again, and so he's right here in front of him. So the time to deal with this is right here while the man is right here in front of him. But Jesus, the way he addresses this, when he addresses their concerns, which aren't really concerns, he addresses their accusations with a series of questions. He asks them, basically, is there anything wrong with what I'm doing? And if there isn't, why are you getting on me about it? This is, among other things, the perfect example of biblical boldness. Sometimes when you're witnessing to somebody, it is essential that you handle things right then and there. And Jesus was not mean to them. Jesus was not cruel to them. Jesus was not accusatory to them. But by asking questions, he forced them to give answers, at least within themselves. And in doing so, he forced them to address the situation in their own heart. Sometimes, people say we're standing here on these corners with these streets, with these signs, and people say, what good does that sign do? Well, the simple fact is, when you look at my sign for a couple of seconds or for half a second or whatever, you have to register and see what you're looking at. And for a couple of seconds, you have to deal with and address, even within yourself, even if you never speak to me, you never, whatever, you have to, for a few minutes there, a few seconds there, you have to deal with what you think about Jesus Christ. And so when Jesus addresses these fellows, he's putting them in the same predicament. He's forcing them by the questions that he asks to deal with what they really think the Sabbath is all about. Is the Sabbath about only, this thing where you're not allowed to do anything? Or is the Sabbath about, is it lawful to do that which is right on the Sabbath? Well, it's right to help a man who needs help. It's right if your ass falls into a ditch to get him back out. There's nothing wrong with those things. And so they've taken all that thing. So the question he asked really essentially is there anything wrong with what I'm about to do? And if it's right, then what's your problem? Why does it bother you that I'm doing it? You see, God always knows how to put his finger on the real issue. That is one of God's skills. I'm going to show you something. I got a whole message. I'm going to run to this verse. I have a whole message I preach out of this verse. Psalm 1. Psalm 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. And so one of the things when I cover this verse, I point out that the ungodly have a counsel, and sinners have a way, and scorners have a seat. And so that some of your biggest critics and some of the people that make the most noise about what you're doing are people that are sitting on their big fat rear ends doing nothing. See, that's the seat of the scornful. It's not the position of the scornful. It's not the forward-leaning work of the scornful. We go out there on the street and we're doing our thing, and we get all sorts of accusations. We get all sorts of people come up and have a hard time with what we're doing. So, but it's always interesting to me the sort of people that accuse us. And if you ask a little bit more about what's going on with them, you'll find that well, I won't say it's never happened, but to my knowledge, in 27 years or whatever doing this, we've never been confronted by a guy who was on deputation going to the mission field. We've never been confronted by a diligent, soul-winning, door-knocking, separated church member. Whenever we're confronted, the people that call the law on us, the church people that call the law on us, if you dig a little bit deeper into their lives, what you find out is they are doing nothing for Jesus Christ, and so they want to get on to you about what you're doing, and why you're not doing what they think you should be doing, or they're doing nothing. And so these fellows here that are accusing Jesus, they've made no effort, as far as you can tell, so it's not recorded in the scriptures. They've made no effort to help this fellow, but it bothers them that Jesus is about to help this fellow. And so the issue isn't really the Sabbath, and it isn't really poverty. It isn't really political corruption or war. The issue in this situation, like it is in every situation where God deals with man, where man deals with God, the issue here is sin. But the issue here is a very distinct type of sin, and that is the sin of hard-heartedness. And you see that we go. Let me actually get back to Mark 3, so I can read you the verse. There's all sorts of sins, and one of the more damning ones is hard-heartedness. Verse 5 says, "And when he looked up around on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored, whole as the other." So hard-heartedness is a tricky thing, man, and it's one of those things that can happen and can be well on its way before you realize it's happening. Look at Hebrews 3. The Bible says in verse 7. And again, he limiteth a certain day, saying in David, Today, after so long a time, as it is said, Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. For if Jesus had given them rest, then would he not have afterwards spoken of another day? There remains therefore a rest to the people of God. So the context here is that men, when they hear the voice of God, one of their responses is they can harden their heart. People say, and we get this a lot, people say, well, if God did X, Y, or Z, then I would respond the way God wants me to respond. Well, if you're not responding to what God's already showed you, God's not obligated to show you anything else. We had a guy, more than once, but this one guy always sticks out in my mind. He said, if God would come down here in the form of a man where I could see him, I would believe him. And I said, probably not, because God came down in the form of a man, and people just like you nailed him to a tree. And that, dear friends, is how you win friends and influence people. That's what makes you popular parties, saying things like that. But it's the truth. It's the truth. It's the truth. And a man with a hard heart, it almost doesn't matter what you show him. It doesn't matter what he sees. I mean, hard-heartedness, for example, let's look back at the history of the children of Israel. Let's look at the times where they were hard-hearted towards God. And, hard-heartedness, at one point, at the one point in the history of the children of Israel, they are standing at the foot of a mountain that is on fire, right? I mean, God has delivered them out of Egypt with great signs and great wonders, and he parted the Red Sea, and he's feeding them with manna, and they come to this bottom of this mountain, and Moses goes up the mountain to get the law of God, and there's a boundary set around the mountain because the mountain is on fire. And those people stood there at the bottom of that mountain and said, let's make a golden calf. Why? Well, how can you be so stupid? How can you be so dumb? How can you be so blind? Well, hard-heartedness. Hard-heartedness. You can stand there at the crossing of the Red Sea and be plotting your idolatry because of hard-heartedness. You can sit in a godly home with parents who are not perfect but do love you and do love Jesus Christ and are doing their best to see you into adulthood and not kill you. You can sit in a home just like that and you can be plotting your trip to the hog pen because of hard-heartedness. I know I get off this a lot, but church kids, man, if church kids are just they're the weirdest people out there. I mean I know kids that they have seen. If they were honest with if they're honest with what they've seen in their life, they have seen God provide for their family. They've seen God provide for their parents. They've seen God pay their parents' bills and their bills. But because of hardness, they become an ungrateful, griping, complaining whelp. And I've seen that up close in my own home. I know a girl right now who doesn't live at my house. In case those of you that know me, this is not the situation. But a kid that I mean, tell you, man, I love this kid's family. I love the mom. The dad I could probably do without. I love her big brother. I love her big brother's wife. That sounded weirder coming out than I thought it would. But I love this whole family, the extended family, the mom, the son, the daughter. Well, the one daughter, the youngest daughter, she just got mad at God or for whatever reason and just got hard-hearted. And now she's this, short-haired, bull-dyke lesbian-looking chick and with tattoos and all kind of stuff. And every opinion that she had, every opinion that she expressed, every opinion, every value that she was raised with, she has flipped on its head. And we recently spoke to her mom, and there's just no communication there. She's turned her back on her parent. She's turned her back on everything she was raised with. And hardness did that to you. And that is essentially the same deal that these guys are looking at here. I mean, they had been following around. These guys have been following Jesus around, waiting for him to heal people, which means he had healed enough people that there is a reasonable expectation that when they go to the synagogue and they know there's this guy with the withered hand that shows up, they know that Jesus is probably going to heal this guy. The odds are in favor of it. And it never crosses their little pinhead minds to go, wait, this guy's healing people. Why are we the bad? Why are we opposed to him? Are we the good guys? Are we the bad guys? What are we? If a man is trying to do right, just think about this for a second. If a man is trying to do right to the best of his ability, let's just not even talk about Jesus. Let's talk about just some guy who is trying to do good and trying to do the best of his ability and maybe doesn't do everything the way you would do it. Why would you be opposed to that man? You might not do it the way he would do it, but why would you be opposed to that man? Why would you rise up against that man and be grieved by what he's doing when he's trying to do right? Why? Because of hard-heartedness. So these guys have been following Jesus around, like I said, and they've been following him around long enough that they knew what to expect. They knew they were reasonably convinced that if they could get him in front of this guy with the withered hand, then they could like trick him or catch him or something, and catch him healing on the Sabbath. And now, we got you. And it never even occurs to them that if this goes the way we plan, there's going to be one less sick guy in our town, and that's good news. So they knew that Jesus healed enough people. They knew that they could expect it. Yet, rather than glory about what was about to happen, rather than question how in the world this was happening, all they could think of was to accuse him. I've known some guys, man, go off and do some work, and not the sort of thing I would do, but I'm happy they're doing. I'm happy something's going on. There are some things that go on in the name of ministry that I personally wouldn't do. But what I've tried to do is, especially as I've gotten older, I've just tried to leave people alone. Like unless you're hurting me, or unless I think you're doing something genuinely unscriptural. And if I think you're doing something genuinely unscriptural, then I will do my best to speak to you as a brother in Christ and say, hey man, why do you do it this way? Have you ever thought about this? And people have done that to me. Everybody has got, the people that don't go street preaching have lots of opinions about it, how it should be done. And so I just try to take that in the spirit that it's meant. I was going somewhere with all that. But yeah, if a guy's doing right, just leave him alone, right? But instead of rejoicing in the fact that good was being done and rejoicing in the fact that God was going to heal this fella, they'd rather just accuse Jesus of they're more worried about their understanding of the Sabbath, which is apparently not a proper understanding of the Sabbath, because Jesus corrects them. they're more worried about that Jesus complies to their understanding of what the rules are than they are that this miracle is about to happen right there in front of them. But now we got to talk about having knowledge that these guys have hard hearts. We have to spend a few minutes here and we have to talk about how a man's heart gets hardened and how that happens. And so we're going to look at the easiest example of this, which is in Exodus 7. And my dear Calvinist brethren, I don't even know what a brethrens would be. I guess it'd be like more than one group of brethren. I don't know. But anyway, so Exodus, my brethren, the Calvinists, they sometimes they got a different take on this scenario that I'm fixing to lay out than I do, and I'll go through the verses and I'll show you why I think the way it works. I think it does. Exodus 7. We're going to start at verse 1 for context. And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. Thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother, it's the brethrens that got threw me off. The whole word's ruined for me now. Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh that he shall send the children of Israel out of his land. Verse 3, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, bring forth mine armies, and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgment. So a Calvinist will look at that, and they will say, see, God told Moses before he even went that that God was going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Okay, yeah, that is what it says. And Pharaoh was not going to let the people go, and that God was setting Pharaoh up, and that Pharaoh is just a bit player in all this. I'm not putting words in the mouths of Calvinists, but this is generally the way they've explained it to me, their take on it. Is it right? That right there is the sign that God hardens a man's heart sometimes, and that is true. God does sometimes harden a man's heart. But let's look a little bit closer here, okay? So here's the order of events. The order of events is important. The first thing that's going to happen is that Moses is going to speak to Pharaoh, and the second thing that's going to happen is that God is going to harden his heart. His heart, it does not come pre-hardened, even though God in his foreknowledge knows how it works out. So, and that's an important distinction to make, that knowing how a thing will turn out is not the same thing as making it happen that way. Knowing what's going to happen is not the same thing as making it happen. And that's a big deal. But you look here, so what actually happens. So God tells Moses, you're going to go there, you're going to speak to him, and I'm going to harden his heart. Okay, so let's look at what actually happens. Verse 10. And Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh, and before his servants it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt. They also did in like manner with their enchantments. Now no one can explain to me how the wise men and the sorcerers did that. All indications are that they were able to turn their staffs into snakes. And that's not sleight of hand. That's not, the great switcheroo. I mean, they didn't even know that was going to be required of them, I don't think. But there they are. For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart, that he hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. So remember what God told Moses was, you're going to go to Pharaoh, you're going to speak to Pharaoh, and I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Okay? But if you look at the way it actually happened, there's a couple of steps God didn't mention when he told Moses what was going to happen, then the way the thing actually panned out. So Moses goes and speaks, and Aaron does his thing, and maybe one day we'll talk about the miracle and the significance of the rod that turned into a serpent, that being a type of Christ, and it's swallowing up all the other rods, and all that is a typology of Jesus. That's great stuff. But Pharaoh responds in the negative. Then God hardens his heart. See, Pharaoh's heart condition is the result of his actions, not the cause. If they'd gone in there and before they even did anything, Pharaoh had hardened his heart, that'd be one, or God had hardened Pharaoh's heart, that'd be one that you might have a case. And if God did that God would still be right to do that. But that's not what happened. They went in, showed the miracle, Pharaoh responded in the negative, and then, with an unhardened heart, Pharaoh rejected what God had done. And then God hardened his heart. So Pharaoh's heart being hardened is God's response to Pharaoh's reaction. So what this guy is doing, what Pharaoh is doing, Pharaoh is setting himself up. Pharaoh is cutting his own throat. And there is a side or an aspect to God's character that really despises being ignored. I mean, the most important person in the room that talking is the Lord, right? Whatever room it's in. If God has something to say, everybody else needs to shut up and let God say it. And when you don't do that, God gets annoyed. God gets angry at men who will not listen to him. And so what God does is God will turn down those. This is probably a very bad phrase to use, but the natural light that God gives a man, the light that lighteth every man that comes into the world, you reject that light, and God turns down the voltage in your brain or something. I don't know what to say. It turns down your ability to perceive the next thing that's going to happen. So you reject that light, and God, you reject the light because you don't want the light, right? Light is coming to the world, men love darkness rather than light. So you turn down that light, you reject that light because you don't want that light, and so then God just hardens your heart. You can't see the light anymore. He's giving you what you want, and him giving you what you want is going to destroy you. You see that with the Romans 1 crowd, where they gave themselves over, and they gave themselves over, and they gave themselves over, and God finally gives them up. You want it so bad? Get you a snootful of it. You see that in the children of Israel when they went to Babylon, because the reason God kicked them out of the land and sent the Babylonian army in to level the place and to scoop everybody up and take them off to I start to say Bunkin land. I've been listening to way too much Patch the Pirate lately. Babylon. The reason they went to Babylon is because of idolatry, right? And so God's tired of their idolatry, so God sends them to Babylon, and when they get to Babylon, they got a guy that builds a giant image and says, bow down to it, or I'm going to cut your heads off. And it's almost like God goes, oh, you like idols, do you? I'm going to send you someplace where a guy's going to make you bow down to idols. You're doing it now because you want to. You're going to do it in the future because even if you don't want to. And I think when a man chooses certain sins, he becomes bound up by those sins to where he doesn't even enjoy them anymore. He can't look forward to them. There's no pleasure in them. And he's bound by them. It's really, really difficult for a man to shake that thing. And homosexuality is one of them. Now, I know we keep circling around, but I mean, come on. It's still June, right? So one of the reasons some of that stuff is so hard to shake is because you've chosen it for so long. And the only way you're going to get free of that thing is if God himself comes in and breaks the chains that you forged. He might have handed you the hammer, but you're the one that forged those chains. So Pharaoh's heart condition, as I said before, it's the result of his actions. It's not the cause of his actions, because he turns the word of the Lord down before his heart gets hardened. So look at Exodus 8. Verse 20. Then the Lord said unto Moses, rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he cometh forth to the water. Let me back up a little bit. Let me back up a little bit. Actually, I don't. My notes are not what they ought to be. Surprise, surprise. So, verse 12. Exodus 8, verse 12. And Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried unto the Lord because of the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died. Out of the houses, out of the village, out of the fields, they gathered together upon heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart. See, that time it wasn't God doing it. That time it was Pharaoh doing it. Pharaoh hardened his own heart. You see it also again in chapter 7, verse 22. But look at verse 19, chapter 8, verse 19. The magician said unto Pharaoh, so this is with the thing with the lice, brings forth lice. Magician said unto Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. So Pharaoh's own magicians, who could not replicate this particular miracle, because it is a miracle that involves bringing life from nothing, and they can't do that. But the magicians come to Pharaoh, and they say, this is the finger of God. Now this We can't perform this miracle. God did this. And Pharaoh doesn't change his mind. He doesn't alter his course. And so it says, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened unto them as the Lord had said. And you go over here in verse 30. And Moses went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. And he removed the swarm of flies from Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people. And there remained not a one. And Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also. So so here's the deal. So Moses goes and Moses does a thing, and Pharaoh rejects that thing, and then his heart is hardened. And I mean, it's crazy stuff. So Pharaoh reaches a point where he was not only blind to God's mercy. I mean, God gives him respite from the plague. God gives him, he pulls back the weight a little bit, gets off Pharaoh's chest a little bit, and Pharaoh's response to God's mercy was to harden his own heart. And man, yeah, I've seen that a bunch. And so look at Exodus 9, verse 34. And when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunders were ceased, he sinned yet more and hardened his hearts, he and his servants. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, neither he let the children of Israel go, as the Lord had spoken by Moses. You can see right there in verse 34 that the very act of hardening your heart in itself is a sin. So Moses does a thing, Pharaoh rejects the thing, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Moses does a thing, Pharaoh rejects the thing, and Pharaoh hardens his own heart. God shows him mercy, Pharaoh hardens his heart. God sends, does this, does that, and after a while, Pharaoh is so far down this road, there's no way to get off of it. There's no way to get off of it. And so that's not God being a jerk to Pharaoh. That is Pharaoh cutting his own throat. That is Pharaoh sinning against God, and God's response to Pharaoh rejecting the knowledge and the revelation that God had offered him was for God to turn the lights down in Pharaoh's head, where now he can't even see. His whole country is being destroyed. People are dying. Crops are being ruined. People are going hungry. There's piles of dead frogs everywhere. There's boils. There's darkness. There's all this stuff going on. But he cannot get past the fact that his heart is so hard. He cannot see past the fact that his heart's so hard. And so when you see people, when you deal with people, and you see that their heart is so hardened that you can show them the Bible all day long, and you can be an example to them all day long, and you should do those things. But at a certain point, you're walking into a situation where there's already some stuff going on. God's already been dealing with somebody, and they're okay. Look in Mark chapter 4, Jesus tells the parable of the sower, and I think it's about verse 16 or so. He's going and he sows, the seed, and the seed falls in different types of ground. But something that's worth noting is that the stony ground that rejected the seed, where the seed couldn't grow, that stony ground, which is typology of a man's heart, that ground was hard and stony before the sower ever got there. The sower didn't come along and harden the ground and then try to shove a seed into it. The ground was already hard before the sower. So that's a thing, right? That's something you got to think about when you're going out and dealing with people. You have no idea what their heart condition is. You don't know where God is in dealing with them, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters, but it doesn't matter because there's nothing you can do about it. So one of the things we go out and pray, we go out to witness and everything. We try to pray, and one of our things is that God would prepare the hearts of the people we're about to talk to, because we don't want to waste our time. We don't want to waste their time. We don't want to waste God's time. And so, Lord, send people by that are ready to hear. Send people by that have hearts that are ready to receive what we have to say out of your Bible. And we get those people. But we also get a lot of people that, man, you can look at them. You can see that the lights have turned off upstairs, man. I would say lights are on, but nobody's home. But I'm not even sure lights are on. But back to Mark 3. So there's a process there that I don't know that people really think about. But if you go through the Bible and you look at what the Bible says about how people work, that you start seeing it everywhere you go. You start seeing it in the faces of people, in the hearts of people, in the reactions of people. And right now, if you're living in America in the 2023, which is what year it is right now, you have some of the hardest-hearted people. I believe the American South is the hardest mission field in the world, or one of the hardest mission fields in the world, because people are just hard-hearted. And they've heard it and all their lives, and they've rejected it, and your society has rejected it. And so now you go out, and really, maybe I've said this before, maybe I haven't. When we first started preaching, man, people come and talk to us. People would get mad sometimes, but people would come and talk to us. And nowadays, for somebody to come and talk to us is a very rare thing. They walk past us while we're telling them what Jesus Christ did for them, and it's like they don't even see us. And it's a weird deal. Mark chapter 3, verse 5. And when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith to the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched forth it out, and his hand was restored as the other, whole as the other. So these fellows had seen Jesus do things, and the reactions that their reaction to the things they had seen had been to harden their heart. And that situation, where God had showed them something and they rejected it, and so their heart gets hardened. That situation not only grieved Jesus, but the Bible says it made him angry. And this is not a Jesus that's angry on the other side of the third heaven, sitting on a throne next to the Father, angry at your sin. I mean, that's one thing, and that's a real thing, and that's something you got to do business with. But this is a Jesus that is standing 3 feet in front of you and is angry. And you're standing there eyeball to eyeball with an angry Jesus, and you are too stupid to see it and too hard-hearted to do anything about it. That's wild stuff. This is the guy that is standing right in front of you, looking at you with anger on his face, is the same fella that ordered the ground to open up and swallow Korah and his crew. And so, as a lost person, you can reject the light that God gives you so much you can no longer see the new light and the darkness, your darkness. Ephesians, right? The light shineth in darkness, and darkness comprehendeth it not. Not only when you were lost, not only are you in the dark, but you are the dark. You can become so blind, you can reject the light that God has given so much you won't see the new light, and your darkness will swallow you up. And you love darkness so much you will spend eternity in a place of outer darkness. That will be the path you chose, and won't none of it be God's fault. Light was available, you chose darkness. And so God says, you want darkness so bad, I give it to you forever. And as a Christian, you can become so beset by sin. And I say beset by sin because Hebrews says there's a sin that easily besets us. You can be so beset by sin that your heart hardens and you can be blind to what God's doing and deaf to what God's saying. And that's a rough spot. Look at Proverbs 4. We're going to come back to Mark here in a second. We're going to look at Proverbs 4 for just a minute. Proverbs 4. Don't know why I'm singing. Oh, I'll tell you. Proverbs 4. Verse 23 says, Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. So you have a responsibility. You have a personal responsibility. You have an active role in making sure that your heart is not hardened. So in verse 5 of Mark 3, Jesus finally looks back at the guy. This whole conversation has been happening in front of this fellow with a withered hand. And Jesus finally looks over at the fellow and says, Stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out, and the hand was restored whole as the other. Now you would think that the men who had seen this happen, mere feet away from them, would react, like a person would react. If I legitimately saw someone get healed, I'd be a little nervous to be around this sort of thing. But I would be because I don't think it's an everyday thing. But I wouldn't be mad about it. And you wouldn't think these guys would be mad about it. And you think they'd be happy for the guy? You think they would consider themselves, how is this being done? You think that they would, their reaction would be, oh my goodness, he did it again. Oh my goodness, it's right here in front of us. Oh my goodness, we better get right with God. But that's not their reaction. Look at verse 6. And the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. So their reaction to Jesus Christ doing good is to plot to destroy him. They wanted to destroy a man who was doing good, a man who was doing right. That's why over in Timothy, when it talks about how men will be haters of those that are good. Jesus Christ was good. He was gooder. He was goodest. He was the goodest, and they hated him the most because of it. Matthew 12, and then we'll draw this down to a close. I'm going to make the case probably next time we go through this. Where am I going? Where am I going? What am I going? Where am I doing? Yeah, okay, sorry. So I'm going to make a case that this incident right here is a pivotal moment in Jesus' dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all his critics. This is where God's dealing with these people changes. And I'll make the case later on. It says, this is the same, in Matthew 12 is the same incident. It said the man stretched forth that hand, verse 13, and he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole like as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Once again, they take a man who's doing right, they take a man who's being kind, and they want him dead. And boy, that says a lot about them. That tells you everything you know about them. And if you're out there trying to be a witness, if you're out there trying to live for Jesus Christ, the people that are against you, that tells you everything about. You know, Dr. Ruckman used to say, friends come and go, but 2 or 3 good enemies will last you a lifetime. And I really believe that you can tell a man, not by his friends, because a man may be your friend because there's some advantage to him, because you have something he needs, whatever. But if a man makes yourself his enemy, that tells your enemies reveal more about you than your friends. But I'm gonna just put this out there. Stick a feather in this. Stick a feather. I start to say stick a feather in your brain. That doesn't make any sense. Just make a note in your brain or in your wherever you take notes. And that right here is a pivotal moment. Right here is a moment when Jesus Christ changes how he deals with these people, because by now they've seen enough and they've heard enough to save the whole world. And all they cared about was their silly rules that they themselves weren't even following. And all they cared about was that something good was happening and they weren't in on it. And they weren't part of it. So they had to be opposed to it. And that changes everything about how Jesus addresses these people. And you see from here on out, from this incident here in Mark 3, that Jesus changes gears. And he is, I won't say it's no more Mr. Nice Guy, but it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. So, that's where we'll stop. Going to get this all set up like I need it to be and get it out there where people can hear it. And those of you that are listening, thank you very much for continuing to listen. I guess we'll keep doing this so we're not doing it anymore. In the meantime, thank you for listening. Like I said, this is Michael. This has been the Street Preachers Corner podcast, recorded from a mobile above-ground underground bunker. One of these days, I'll do this in a Zeppelin. That'll be great. Recorded from a Zeppelin. Anyway, this has been my podcast. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the other side.